Well, hello, and Happy New Year. I hope that everyone had a wonderful time, and I hope that, the New Year is good for all of you. So, maybe turn this down a little bit. So what are we going to be doing in this stream? Well, we need to formalize the structure, right? And basically what we need to do is... Oh, I think... Oh, that works. I feel like there's a way to change this. I didn't check that. Oh, that's scuffed. It's definitely scuffed. Alright. So... Okay. I'm gonna have to change that for next stream. So we need to have the engine structure. Right. So I guess I should back up a little bit. Hi, I'm Lishka, and I'm a crazy person who hates himself. So I've decided to make Starforge, and, well, more accurately, to finish what Codehatch had started. So if you don't already know, that Starforge in about 2010-ish, Codehatch is a pair of Canadians decided to make Starforge. And a few years later, they abandoned it, right? They completely abandoned. Right. To work on another project that they completely abandoned, to work on another project that they completely abandoned, to work on... I'm starting to see a pattern here. So, obviously, they're not going to finish it. Which is a shame too, because Starforge was a science fiction. Right? It's a sci-fi crafting survival game. And I know we have like a million of these now. You know, they're kind of a dime a dozen now. but they wanted to go for Halo meets Minecraft. And that's either the worst idea ever or the best idea ever. I was originally in the first camp. But as I started playing more and more Minecraft mods and stuff like that, and played more of the side games for Halo, I realized that, well, there's a way to merge the two. Now, I could use Unreal or Godot or Unity, although screw Unity. I'm gonna be making my own. Okay. And I'm calling it the Foxfire engine. Alright. Now, I need to come up with a structure. Okay. And this is both the file structure and the code structure. Now, I'm going to be following in the footsteps of id Software. Okay. id Software. For a lot of the inspiration. Alright. See, in the 1980s, right? That's not how you spell John. John Carmack, with his doctorate from the College of Winterhold, decided to make a 2D platformer for DOS. And this was generally viewed as impossible at the time. But he just said, hold my battle axe, and made Commander Keen. Right. And then Romero came around. And wanted a, first person action game with 6 degrees of freedom. And again, this is viewed as impossible. And then in 1991, Carmack made Wolfenstein 3D. 2 years later, he made Doom. This is a year before the PS1. Okay, keep that in mind. Right, this is a year before the PS1. 3 years after that, he made Quake. This is 1 day before N64. So, some really impressive stuff, right? So, one of the ways that they structured their engines is that you have right? You have your engine.exe, right? You have your engine.exe, and then you have your game.dll. Right, and I'm going to be doing a very similar thing. So in order to have this, so in order to have this, right? I don't even know what's going on here. So there's like two different ways to have the DLL stuff, right? One way is you have like you have your exe here, right, and then you have your DLL here, right, and then both of these have access to a header file, so that both know exactly which way it is, and this is like at compile time, right? The other way is that you have your exe stuff here, right? And then you have and here's your exe, and here's your DLL. Right, and then there is no communication between the two. Right, and this loads in that at runtime. And this is how I'm going to be doing it. Let me explain why. Right? See, when you have it at runtime, then the DLL does not need any header files. Just as long as there's functions with the right signatures, it'll just work fine. So I want the DLL to essentially just be data, right? And the exe to do the stuff, right? So the DLL's job is to configure the exe. Okay. So it'll handle things like what the window. Alright, it'll handle what the window mode is. It'll handle things like the resources, you know, like sprites. Etc. Oh hey, I have a viewer. Awesome. Say hi in chat. And let me know if you have any questions about anything. About just game development, engine development, or anything like that, or even the history of Doom, or id Software, really. So the DLL will be handling the configuring things. So it'll handle resources, it'll handle the ECS stuff, right, things like that. So, and then the engine itself will actually execute, right? So what the DLL is actually going to be doing is load resources, and then it will also send I don't know what I did. Hold on. Yay, Scuff. So how's it going? Hope you had a lovely new year. And also let me know if the audio settings are bad or not. Alright. Yeah, I get it. So it'll send a command queue. Okay. Right. So it's basically the exe, right? And the DLL, right? The exe will query the DLL, right? And then it'll send a Well, see, okay, so one of the things that I'm going to be doing is both data-oriented design and data-oriented programming. Okay, the reason being is that in the context of an engine, it is far superior. So, right, so you have object-oriented programming, and here you have classes and you inherit them, you know, you get your objects. And like for easy things like RPGs, yeah, this is fine, right? But for first-person shooters, yeah, no, it's not good. It's just really bad because you have this harsh, tree, and then these all come out, and you just get a mess, right? You end up with having to promote things up, and it can be a nightmare. Granted, Unreal Engine does just fine with a very hierarchical thing, and you also have a lot of virtual functions, and these are generally bad, but UE4 uses these all the time and it works fine. But in high demand, just with high demand stuff, it does not work very well. Right. So what I want to do is I have, like, say, positions, right? And I just have a bunch of positions all in one shot. Alright. Then I can have velocity. And I have all these all in one shot. All the data. So another way of thinking about the entity component system, it'll be easier to take a look at event systems. Right? Events. So you have three components, right? You have your events, you have your dispatch, and you have your listeners, right? Events are effectively just flags. Okay. Dispatchers, well, listeners are functions, and dispatchers are lists of listeners. Okay. And what you end up getting, right, effectively under the hood, is you have you effectively just have, like, whenever an event happens, you go through the list of the listeners and then you just fire them one at a time, one after the other, right? And that's what happens. And to go back to entity component systems, right? ECS, entity component systems. You have entities, you have components, and you have systems, right? So components are just data, systems are just functions, and entities are proxies, right? And entities are just proxies for components and systems. Okay. So all that an entity will do is just handle where the components are being stored, or just effectively just manage how they're just a container for something, right? So for instance, say you have a particle, right? And that particle will quote unquote have a position and a velocity, right? But all these are just pointers. Okay. That's all that it is. And in essence, all that you're doing is just saying, hey, this particle owns these two things, right? And then under the hood, right, and it will also even have maybe even a pointer to, like, a flag, right, that just has, you know, has physics. Right? And so the particle class itself doesn't really have anything, right? All that's really doing is just kind of subscribing to a position, a velocity, and the has physics system. Right. And properties are going to be very important here, right? So yeah, and each of the positions might have a pointer pointing back. Same thing with the velocity. Right. And then, like, physics will have a handler on these guys, right? So it is a little, like, it can be pretty confusing to think about exactly like what's going on with all of it. Because I want the data to be like contiguous in memory. So you just have one block of positions, one block of velocities. And that way I can just send over like a position buffer to a compute shader, for example. You just have the compute shader handle all of the physics, or even the AI, just motion in general, and handling all that stuff is a possibility. Right. So there are different ways of handling that, right? So yeah. So one of the things that I could do, say, is like let's take a look at the particle, right? So in its constructor, right, we'd have like a component dot dot pause dot add this, right? And then dot val dot add this, right? And then you can have a system dot add, or system dot physics dot add this, right? There could be other ways of handling things like that. Like the actual things, like I can do some operator overloads, right? So I can have particle extends entity, right? And then I can say this plus component dot pause plus dot val plus system dot physics, right? Could do something like that. But I also really can't either. Right? Because the DLL will have to have access to it. That's kind of a bit of a problem. Because then I'd have to have like essentially like the whole engine almost. At least the empty component system exposed. And I'd have to have like the whole empty component system exposed. In like a header file. Which means making your own games would be a lot more difficult. Right? And that's like something I kind of want to avoid if I can. Oh boy. Because I really, you know, that's true. Because I love this kind of syntax. You know, I mean, developing games is a lot easier on me. I can draw a better heart. I cannot draw today. There we go. Close enough. Alright. So how much do I want people to be able to develop games without having access to the header? Right. Because I'm also gonna have to have a lot of like function pointers and stuff. Because I also want to be able to hot swap it. Be able to have things loaded in ad hoc. Because I also want to have like a launcher. Because if the DLL is loaded in at runtime, then I can even make a launcher that can launch different games based off of the DLLs. What happened to my music? I don't know what happened there. Okay. So Because this all depends on how I want the DLL structure to look like what the code looks like. For your average user, and also for myself, because I don't want it to be too difficult on myself to be making games with it. So I might end up having to release an SDK, which would be a header that would include all of the things that I need it to include. Right? Because the DLL needs access to because it would be nice to be able to overload, because I'd really like to have operator overloading, right? Because the DLL, right, would have like a config, right, and then oh boy, how would it? Because like the DLL would have to have access to a lot of different stuff, because it also have to have access to all of the global header things, right? And how would it breach the DLL barrier? That's the other question. Like, how would I be able to send information over? Right. And if it's at runtime. Because how would it be able to? Because the objects would only be kind of objects by name, right? Because at some point you'd have to have like a spawn entity, an entity.spawn function, and sending that over from the DLL is not exactly easy to do. Because in order to change the game, Hmm. I feel... Yeah, no, this is just kind of interesting because I can't... Cause the config would be something like you'd have, you know, entity dot, well, it would be entity dot list dot add something like particle. Right, and then particle. But how would you have, because it'd have to be like an anonymous thing, but it doesn't really matter because entities don't exist. They're not real. They're just proxies for information. I mean, what even would they be? Would they be like a map of pointers? But it'd be a mix of both. It wouldn't be like a map of... Like, how would this even work? Right? Like... Because you need to have... Oh boy. Because you would need to have... something like... What would it be? It'd be like... Dear Lord. It'd be... You'd have to... subscribe... You'd have to like subscribe them. But they themselves wouldn't be anything. Would it be like a map of maps? Would it... Could an entity just be a map under the hood? Because with like overloading... Right, because with overloading what you can have is... You know, you'd have a map, right? And then you'd have name equals particle, right? And the map that would be something like pause, you know, back, and then you'd have val, you have another back, and you'd have, well, this is a back pointer, and then you'd have Alright, this is a function pointer. Alright. Got something like that, right? And then if you just had a bunch of overloading, and you can have the syntax that you want. And as long as it returns the correct information, it'll be fine. Right? Okay. So it could still be able to load dynamically without the use of without it being done at runtime, right? Because the problem coming in here is that in the exe, right, you basically have, you know, DLL import, you know, blah, right, and you have your has DLL, right, so then you have your DLL and then you have your, I mean, this is an actual real syntax, but then you'd have your DLL and you search for your function, right? And this is just a function pointer. And that makes things rather difficult. Because what we want to get out of it is we want to get a lot of information out of the DLL. Which means I have to be very specific on how the DLL is actually formulated. Like, how important is it to have the DLL option? Because it might end up being a far bigger pain in the neck. But I also want people to actually use this engine. You know what I mean? And I don't want to have a massive, SDK or anything like that. I would love for it if it's only like either a singular header and you just make a DLL, or you have no header. And as long as you have the right functions, the right signatures in the DLL, then you can just make a game with it. Like, that is the ideal instance that I want to go through, that I want to have. Oh boy. halfway through the stream, and I feel like I haven't made any progress. I almost feel like I want to give up for now. Okay, let's see. Let's do a little bit of due diligence and take a look at a little bit of okay. Let's take a look at what is it that I want. C++ DLL. Plus DLL. Create your own dynamic length library. Alright, let's take a look at this, shall we? So we want to add exported functions and variables to the DLL, create a console app project, and okay. Okay. Add a header file to the DLL. Okay. Okay. So you just create the header file. This has all of the declarations for the DLL. They're all marked as external. Right. And in here, the math library.h. I have to do that. See, it's very difficult to have the engine be the exe and the game be the DLL. It's generally a lot easier to have it be the other way around. Right. Just with like the way that it uses. Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because otherwise you have a bunch of because you need to set the proc address for the functions, but the functions all you can really get is functions, right? And then how is the DLL supposed to be able to get information from the exe? Calling functions from exe within DLL C++. Okay, how do I call a function? Find in my exe inside my DLL. Probably bookmark this too. Have a function in your DLL that the exe can call, passing in a function pointer to your log function. Inside the DLL, store that function pointer and use it when you need to log things. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because you need to... So I can either have everything be that, right? Because if I have everything effectively just be functions, right? Because I can pass functions, but I won't have the operator overloading. Because all the operator overloading needs to be in a header file. Oh boy. And this would be even more difficult if I was doing this in C#, I feel like. How much do I care about people using my engine? That's what it boils down to. Because if I don't care about other people using the engine, then I could just not do any of the DLL stuff. Or I can flip it around and say, if you want to make your own game and you have your DLL, then you just get the DLL and the header file. But at that point it might as well just be a .lib. It could be a statically linked library. At which point you don't even need the header file, you don't need the DLL. Oh boy. So how would I do this? I feel like I'd have to ask Reddit. But I'm not entirely sure how to go about doing that. Like, I don't know what subreddit to go to or anything. Oh, I got Matt Codes. Thank you for following me. Hope you had a good year. And if you're in the stream, pop in and say hi. I can see the chat. I'm just here thinking about how I want to format my engine. Right, because I basically just have like two I really just have like two different ideologies. I don't really know which way I want to go. Yeah. Because I'm gonna... I really don't know how... I really don't know how this is gonna go. Which is really, really disappointing. You know, I came in here thinking that I had it all worked out. And I don't. Which is a bit of a problem. Because I want the DLL to just send information. And I want the engine to handle everything. Right. I mean, it could all just be strings. Could just send a bunch of strings over and have well, at that point I might as well just make my own scripting language. But that also means that you can't add in your own but then that means that you can't add in your own functionality, which is something I don't really like. So at this point I basically have two options. Either A, alright, because I have what is in essence because I have basically two options, right? I can either have a better engine or I can have faster game dev, right? A better engine is you know, we have right here we have it's more work, but more accessible. Because a game's livelihood really depends on the community, right? And if you have something like an engine that everyone can use, then that really helps facilitate more people getting it, right? Because I could sell the engine at a pay what you want kind of system. Then you just make your own games and you can sell those games and redistribute the engine as you see fit, which would be nice, right? Because otherwise I'd be entirely dependent on game sales and whatever I get from Twitch eventually. Which I don't really know if that's going to be that reliable. Because on here we have get the game faster, but at the cost of less accessible. So I could be hurting the life of the game, because there's still people making WAD files for Doom, like to this day. Like myhouse.wad was made last year, well, 2 years ago, in 2022. You know, so that really tells you how important, you know, modding and community content is important for a game. I mean, look at Minecraft. So, you know, we also have, you know, less headache. Right. So how would I pull this off? Like, I know that there's a path towards what it is that needs to happen, and I feel like it could be a detraction from my original mindset of having the DLL be the game and having the EXE be the engine. Because the DLL loading in at runtime means that I can make a launcher. You can load in whatever community games that you want and mods and all that stuff. That would be best. Halfway through, like in between the two, would be have the engine be the DLL and the EXEs be the games. Which is kind of the industry standard. But I don't know if I like that. It's the problem. Right. Because I think I could do pre-compiled headers, which would be nice. And you can just include those. Oh, let's take a look at precompiled headers. C++ precompiled headers. Let's take a look at precompiled headers. Let's break class interface information into header files. These header files can later be included in programs that use the class. By precompiling the headers, you can reduce the time a program takes to compile. Okay. I feel like it would be quite a mess if I try to do a singular header file to include. Because then I'd have to refactor like everything. Which is a bit of a nightmare. Because the only other option that I would really have is to do something like in the DLL, right? You'd have like an init function, and it would have, you know, a function pointer, or even like a map, maybe? Right. And then you'd have how would you even do this? You could do like an array of strings. Have like an array of strings that you return. And that configures everything. But then if you did this, then you can't add your own functionality. Because I don't really like the syntax of not being able to just say plus, you know, the operator overloading for entities. But if I wanted to do that, then I would essentially have to close the engine, right? Unless I had a mod loader of some kind. To be able to add functionality. Right. Because either way, even with mods and whatnot, you'd have to I mean, I guess there could be like a dual use or something? Because honestly, I would just kind of not care and just make the games normally. But I also feel like it'd be very difficult to maintain a strong community if I did that. Because I want these games to be successful. I feel like a game like Starforge would have to have mod support of some kind. And allowing the community to make their own games with this engine, I feel like would be important as well. So, I don't know, I feel like I'm at a bit of an impasse with this. Because am I focusing on the games or am I focusing on the engine? Because if I focus on the games, then I could just be more focused on teaching how the engines work. And then people can just go off and make their own games. Using other, using other engines or whatnot. Or writing their own engines by watching these streams. Like, that is a possibility. I don't really know if that's going to be useful. Like, do I focus on the engine, or do I focus on the games? And the engine is just kind of secondary. Like that's the real question there. Because it's very difficult to think of like how it's, how do I put it? Like it's hard to figure out exactly what the focus should be. Because if I make the engine too restrictive, then people won't be able to use it to, like, they won't be able to add in their own functionality. They'll just kind of have to they'll just have to use it as is. And I would also have to add in a lot of components as well into the engine, right? Yeah, this is a real head scratcher. Do I even have the faculties to come up with a solution? Like, oh boy. So if I just focus on the games, right? If I just focus on the games, I can do it. I could do it no problem, and I can have the syntax be however I want. But if I focus on open-endedness, then I'm going to have to be very careful with syntax and operator overloads and things along these lines, because the only thing that's going to really benefit from that is going to be the engine itself. Right? In addition, like, it would be very difficult to include things like controls or like how weapons behave. If you're making like a first-person shooter, then it'll be very difficult to implement how weapons behave. If you're making an RPG, then it'll be very difficult to create new enemies and define how like leveling up works and things like that. So having the DLL, like it could be DLL and pre-computed headers, but if I do that, then the headers are going to be an absolute mess, because it's effectively all going to have to be in one header. And they'll be very, very difficult to work with. And if I want to have an SDK, then I'm going to have the DLL and the header, and again, the header is going to be colossal. It's going to be this absolute monstrosity in order to manage how the headers are going to work. So do I want to inspire people to use my engine, or do I want to inspire people to make their own engine? Right? Because if I do release the engine as something that people can use, then the only way that they'll know how it works is if they go in and watch the VODs. Right? That's going to be the only way that they're going to know how to do it, and that's a lot of content. Unless someone makes tutorials on how to use the Foxfire engine. And I'm not entirely sure, like in, games like Space Engineers supports mods. There's also the concept of like DLC and things like that. So being able to, because then like how would I register new components? Because I'd have to register new components. And would the risk of the community falling apart even be worth it? And how necessary is mods for a healthy game? Because there's games like League of Legends, it doesn't have mods. There's games like Halo, which has a very limited modding, community. Even like Source games and things like that. There's plenty of games without mods. Like Call of Duty doesn't have mods and it's massive. So I don't really feel, and not to mention, if you have a multiplayer game, then mods can be very risky to have. So it's and Is the modding something that is indicative of, is the modding the reason for a healthy community, or is it that the community, the healthy community, creates the mods? You know what I mean? Like, it is a lot to think about. And for all I know, maybe later on down the road, I would end up making a full, you know, enterprise level engine or something. Because, like, the Unreal Engine didn't start off as something that you could use at an enterprise level. It started off closed. And then they later released it as an engine for other people to use. And the Doom engines were never really intended for people to make their own games with. It's just kind of sort of happened. It was much more of an internal tool. But people still, because like it just eventually became open source. And all that stuff. I mean, and all this is going to be on GitHub anyway. So I guess there isn't that much of a problem. Because there's like really nothing, there's really nothing stopping anyone from going in and just downloading the source and building it themselves. If one really wanted to do so. It's just that there really wouldn't be very much support from my end in helping people make games with the engine outside of the streams. So I feel like it would be better if, at least for now, I abandoned the idea of splitting the DLL from the EXE. Right? I think. Because I feel like it'll be too much of a pain in the ass for me to get the whole DLL switcheroo thing going and working. And like I said, the whole purpose of these engines, of these streams and the VODs, are going to be to more teach people how to approach making your own engine, and then you can just do that instead and do it however it is that you want. So it will still be like an incremental kind of process, because everything that I'm going to be doing is going to be adding onto itself to the point that you get to Starforge. So I will be making a bunch of games using the Foxfire engine until I get to Starforge, which I also feel will be pretty difficult. Because I'll have like the game class have like a static thing or something, and all that will have to be a completely separate file. I can still do a launcher, I don't really know how I'm gonna allow people to like purchase different games, right? Like, how does DLC even work? It would be a lot easier if it was just DLLs that are downloaded. But that also gives rise to the problem of how do you even handle the DLLs and the XCs? I mean, it could be a static library. That would be the easier way of doing it. If like the whole thing is just static lib. And let's take a look, shall we? C++ static library. Create and use a static library. As if it's a static lib, then I don't need to worry about because if it is a static lib, then I don't need to worry about things along those lines, right? Yeah, because it's up in. Yeah, because it'd just be a static lib. And but even if it's a static lib, if I'm going to be adding in my own kind of custom stuff, and custom functionality, then I'm going to need to. How would I do this? Because the static library path would oh wait, I didn't need to. Oh, you do need to include even the static libraries. Which means I need all the headers. So how would I dynamically call a DLL? Because then I would have to get the function and then use the function to pass in all the information that I need from the exe. And then the DLL would have to use that information. That is a lot of functions. It would be a lot of functions. You have to like do a type def struct. And then you'd have to union them. and then do all of that stuff. Oh. And then you'd have to for each DLL-exe, define a macro and list its implementations. The header file uses the macro definitions to define the needful. This creates an enum for the libraries. And then, yeah, this is I feel like I'm gonna have to go to Reddit and ask people of Reddit how I would. I mean, I could do Stack Overflow, but because I want to avoid a megalithic header file. And I also want to reuse this engine for other games. I mean, I guess it could go straight into Starforge, but there's a bunch of other games that I want to make first. There's like quite a few that I want to make first. I'm not sure if I can use this same engine in order to do that. Because I would like to do some operator overloading. And you guys have just been staring at the same thing for this whole time. What? Yeah. So if I had the DLL just return a bunch of strings, that wouldn't be very good. Because I would also need to return function pointers. And good God. How would you do this? Okay. I don't know what's going on with my microphone. Keep hearing stuff going on. Your main program should export a logging function and make it known to the DLL. Your DLL needs to export a function such as blah 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 that takes a function pointer and stores the past value somewhere into its global data. Main program in another DLL, make a stub main that links all the DLLs together. Yeah, on Unix this would be super easy. Okay, Windows. Should be a lot easier in Linux. But wait, because I still need the headers, right? Because I don't want the megalithic headers. Because the megalithic headers are just messy and disorganized. So how would I pull this off? I need to... what do I need to do? Because I can't pass in any structs or classes. I can't pass in any structs or classes from the exe into the DLL either. Not without the headers. And I need like all of the headers. Which means allowing other people to use the engine is more difficult. And in all actuality, the only thing that really changes is the main CPP, main C++ file. One with the entry point is the only one that needs to change. Ugh. Which I guess is fine. Yeah, I think for now I'm going to go... well, yeah, because I can just refactor everything later. I think for now for now just exe. I think that's the conclusion that I've come up with, and I think my headset is dying. So I'm gonna leave it here. I appreciate you guys dealing with my BS. So thank you for coming in. That's gonna be it out of me.